I'm Arna Alcon. I'm the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here this afternoon. In 1985, Professor Santos came to this beautiful room, to this stage, and I think to this piano, to offer a concert in dedication of a new Steinway that had been acquired by Bridgewater State. And here we are all these years later, ready to hear a beautiful concert in dedication to Professor Santos. So we are part of a chain, or maybe it would be better to say a story, or maybe a concerto that links us back to Professor Santos and to the students and the audiences and the colleagues and the music and the composers that meant so much to him and that he gave so much to. And of course, he was linked to his teachers and students and audiences and music that he appreciated, and maybe perhaps most importantly, to composers that he worked so hard to bring out from the shadows that racism had put them in. So here we are, not at the end, but a way stop. And I can tell you that I am here to thank you on behalf of the students and audiences and faculty and colleagues who are yet to come, who will benefit from music and from community and from beauty, thanks to what Professor Santos did with his life and his legacy. So thank you for being here. It is my great pleasure to introduce Executive Vice President and Provost Dr. Karim Ismaili.
Thank you, Dean Alcon. It is a sincere honor for me to share these remarks on behalf of President Clark and the university. Unfortunately, President Clark tested positive for COVID recently, and it's the only thing that would have prevented him from being here today. He sends his very best wishes to everyone as we celebrate the life and legacy of Professor Emeritus Henry J. Santos at Bridgewater State University. There are dozens, no, probably hundreds of anecdotes that help us understand what a remarkable man Henry Santos was. And I'm sure we're going to hear a number of those today. But one story in particular stands out because it captures all of the qualities this very special man lived his life by. It's a story that he himself told with some relish, and it has nothing to do with his extraordinary talent as a musician and composer of worldwide fame, or as a much-beloved teacher of music for his entire adult life, 30-plus years at this university, or even of his deep respect for and his gratitude toward Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who, in 1952, invited Henry, then a fellow graduate student at Boston University, to move into his apartment after Henry had been ordered to vacate his own by a racially challenged landlord, thus beginning a friendship between Dr. King and Professor Santos and their wives Coretta and Leola that would last a lifetime. The story about Henry Santos that is most telling about the man and his character occurred not on a stage or a classroom or an apartment on Massachusetts Avenue. It occurred, of all places, on a school bus when his daughter Nancy was a young girl attending Sacred Heart School in Kingston, not far from the Middleborough home where she had been raised. Nancy, the daughter of Henry and Lee, was a student at Sacred Heart School, and she was the only black student riding the school bus. Some of her fellow students on the bus started teasing her with racial taunts and insults. When Henry heard about this, he took action. One morning, he waited for the bus with Nancy, and as the bus stopped, Henry climbed aboard. In his own words, this is what he said. I stood at the front of the bus right beside the bus driver, and I said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Please don't do this anymore to my daughter. It's so hurtful and unfair when you use such words. I'm here to ask you to stop this right now. Thank you." Now, Henry knew full well how important it was to do this, and it worked. The taunts and the teasing stopped. And for the rest of his life, he told the story as a mirror of his own experiences growing up as the only black student in his school in his hometown of Lewiston, Maine. He was, in fact, the only black student at any school in Lewiston, Maine, so he knew what Nancy was going through. "I was an outsider growing up," Henry said in an interview shortly after he retired from Bridgewater. "I was the only black student, and so occasionally I was the target from other kids about being black in a totally white society. But he learned to adapt," he said, "and rather than get angry and turn rebellious, he used his intellect, his talent, and his immense personality to not only survive, but to thrive." In his senior year of high school, he was elected president of his class, the first black student to ever be elected president in the history of his high school. But to understand his development, to understand Henry Santos, we need to briefly look back to his own early upbringing when, at the age of 7, in 1934, his mother brought him to his grandmother's house in New Bedford and showed him a piano that had belonged to her mother. She wanted him to learn how to play, and Henry was eager to learn. He quickly grew to love playing the piano, and with lessons from a family friend, he showed great promise in mastering the most sophisticated and difficult of classical music pieces. What made him friends at school and brought him great popularity among his classmates in Lewiston is the fact that Henry could play boogie-woogie just as well as he could play Mozart. And that's what he did at every school dance throughout his high school years. Henry Santos, an outsider as he described himself, adapted to society and flourished even in the years when people of color in America were subjected to the worst kinds of prejudice. But he never, not once, gave up his principles in order to get by. He was proudly and firmly a black performer, composer, and scholar of black music. Henry became a great musician and composer, and a renowned scholar of the contributions and achievements of black musicians and composers, traveling the nation to do research on their works and publishing what he learned in scholarly journals to establish a permanent record of their accomplishments. Throughout his life, Henry Santos remained a staunch defender of civil rights. He never hesitated, no matter the circumstances, to stand up for the rights of anyone he felt suffered discrimination of any kind. And he was fearless in his pride of black culture and black tradition. He lived his entire 92 years in this way, accompanied as long as he lived by his wife Lee and daughter Nancy. Today we stand in awe of this man and celebrate together his wonderful legacy and the memories and the music that we associate with Henry Santos. If he were here right now, we know he would enjoy every minute of it. But what would give him the greatest satisfaction, would be seeing how his beloved daughter Nancy has lived her life as a devoted wife and mother and professional woman. And he would smile once again, recalling those precious few moments on a bus headed to Sacred Heart School in Kingston so many years ago, where the great musician and composer and teacher was first and foremost and always a loving father. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Henry's daughter, Nancy Santos Gaynor.
Good afternoon. It is so wonderful to see so many dear friends. I thank you so much for coming today. It is quite an honor to be here. My husband Curtis, our sons Henry, Terrence, and Marcus, and I are deeply grateful to all of you for honoring my father's legacy today and for celebrating his grand life as a scholar, a pianist, composer, a professor, a devoted husband to my mother, grandfather, father-in-law, and my father, whom I adored. I have sincere thank yous that I must express before I begin. You know my parents, and they were always polite and expressed their thank yous, so I must do the same. To President Clark, Dean Alcon, Provost Ismaili, I am deeply grateful to you for creating this day that will sustain my father's presence at Bridgewater State University. I think you know how very special this university was to my father, to my mother, who was an alumna, and to me, as I was raised on this campus that my family calls home. In fact, I don't know if some of you know this, but my second job was here at Bridgewater State University, at the time Bridgewater State College, and I worked for Marie Murphy, whom I called the best boss ever. She still was. So this has a very special, special meaning to all of us. To Kelly Salisbury, who magically coordinated this event amidst a pandemic. Kelly, where are you? Here you are. I cannot thank you enough for all the work that went into this truly magnificent event. And if you'd ever like to work in a communications division at Westchester University, I know someone who could make that happen. And in higher ed, we're all friends, right? To Dr. Running, please know that you have my many thanks for helping the music department play such an important role in this day, as the department held many memories for my father. He was proud to be among those who played a critical role in the department's establishment of a music major. To Dr. Nemko, whom my father spoke about quite dearly, I'd like you to know that talking to you brings my father's memory closer to me than you can imagine. Thank you for the care that you have taken to ensure that his memory lives on in the practice rooms and the halls of BSU. And thank you, too, for playing a very special piece that holds deep memory. It was my mom's favorite and my grandmother's, too. And thank you to Lou Ricciardi, who walked this long journey with my father from student to dear friend to the son he never had. My father thought the world of you, and my family and I are truly grateful for the friendship that you bring to us. Thank you for bringing my parents' spirit to this special university today. As we gather today, my father would be so honored and humbled. With a twinkle in his eye, he would want me to exit quickly so he could take center stage and play for all of you. He would want to play to show his deep appreciation and his deep affection for all of you. It is so appropriate that we are in Horace Mann Auditorium today. This was the last space on campus where my father played. I remember the room being filled with those who came to hear this great man play like no one else, as he brought to life classical music played in the ballrooms and salons in New Orleans by composers of color. As many of you know, it was very important to my father to share with the world the vast contributions of classical pianists and composers of color, including himself. My dad was a great man and a scholar. He could lighten up any room with his quick wit, hearty laugh, love for parties, and yes, love for martinis, straight up extra dry with a twist. During my lifetime, it was always the four of us, Mama, Daddy, me, and the piano. I think Renaissance Man captures the essence of my dad best. He wore his love of the arts like a second skin. He oozed passion for music, paintings, poetry, literature, plays, museums. The liberal arts fueled him. I remember when Daddy brought his hi-fi stereo, and he and Mama would sit listening to Vladimir Horowitz, his muse. His head would be bent down, his eyes would be closed, and his long fingers would be extended as if they were spread over the keyboard. You remember my dad's long, long fingers, yes? He was always one with the music, one with every note, one with every strike of middle C, and Mama was always there beside him. Listening to the stereo came to an end some years later when my parents were out taking one of their Sunday rides, and I blew out his speakers listening to Led Zeppelin. Daddy wasn't very happy with me that day, but he never got mad with me, not ever. As Dr. Ismaili told you, I remember being very small, and Daddy and I would go walking hand in hand in the woods behind the house that he and Mama absolutely loved. We did this every Sunday afternoon after he practiced for hours and hours and hours in the morning, always starting at 5 a.m. He loved those woods behind our house. I think in a lot of ways they reminded him of his home, Lewiston, Maine, and Androscoggin County. Dr. Smalley knows all about that. He and Daddy would have a concert, and Dr. Smalley would have his art gallery exhibition, all about Androscoggin County. On these walks, Daddy would listen to me prattle on about school, 4-H, how I didn't like math, and I really didn't need to practice to be a great flautist. So you know how that conversation ended. One day, on one of those walks, I was unusually quiet, especially for those who know me. Daddy always gave me space, and I finally told him what was wrong. I was 6 years old, and I was being bullied on the bus every day and being taunted by cruel racial names, although it wasn't Sacred Heart, it was a public school, Middleborough, actually. Daddy and I had a lot in common. Not only was he an only child, but he was the only black student in Lewiston, as Dr. Ismaili told you. He felt my pain. He really felt my pain. The next day, Daddy took me to the bus stop at my babysitter's, and that was unusual because Mama always took me. When the bus came, Daddy got out of the car, walked up the stairs to the bus, and had a very polite conversation with the bus driver. I remember it as if it happened yesterday. The bus driver nodded, and Daddy proceeded to walk down the aisle to the end of the bus where I never went. He loomed over the seats, and as Dr. Ismaili told you, proceeded to give the bullies a full-out academic lesson about ignorance, injustice, and tolerance in a way that only my father could. I really don't think they understood all the big words he used, but they certainly got the message. There was a hush over the bus, and I was never bothered again. I was soon off to private school after that. My dad was my superhero. He once said to me, "You know, I'm not just about the piano." And he was right. Daddy was about character, always doing your best, putting in those long hours to do so, never taking shortcuts, adhering to your word, always showing genuine kindness and respect to whomever you meet, and being there, always being there whenever you needed him. There are some things that most don't know about my dad. Like the time when Daddy was in his late 80s, Mama was in rehab at Oak Hill, and his car was broken. One of his young students, Cameron Shippey, was scheduled to play the piano at our local church one afternoon, and Daddy didn't want to disappoint him by not being in the audience. So Daddy, whose feet always bothered him, walked about 5 miles from 225 Everett Street all the way to that church in order to make sure that he was there for his student. When the program was over, Daddy walked 5 miles all the way back home and stopped by Oak Hill to sit and visit with Mama. I still don't think Cameron Shippey knows how Daddy got there that day, but that's it. Or the time the class of 1945 wanted him to attend his 70th high school class reunion in Lewiston, Maine. He had been class president and very popular, as you can imagine. He received numerous calls from old friends encouraging him to attend, but he was hesitant about making the drive at the age of 86. After thinking long and hard about it, he didn't want to disappoint his old friends. So what did he do? He bought a brand new car to make the journey. And make the journey he did. He mapped his whole way up to Maine and back. Then there was the time when later in life, Mama came home from the hospital. She was frail, weak, and much smaller than usual. She was sleeping on the couch, so Daddy decided to sleep on the hardwood floor right underneath her. so she would fall on top of him if she fell off of the couch. He slept on that floor often, so she would be safe. What comforts me most now is knowing that his rich legacy, his being, his essence, lives on literally in the fingers of all those with whom he taught. Sandra Litvin, Reese Medeiros and Mason Medeiros, Judy Hanlon, Buck Mahoney, Mrs. Newton, Mrs. Scroggs, Abe Edelman, Lou Ricciardi, Stacy Mazaris, Jay Shama. And the list goes on and on and on. As much as he lives in me, he also lives in the hearts of all of you. I thank you for being here with Curtis, Hank, Terrence, Marcus, and me today, and my cousin Jane. We are here today to celebrate the life of Professor Henry J. Santos, a legend whose life will never really end, thanks to Bridgewater State University and all of you. And now, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce my father's dear friend, confidant, former student, and our family friend, Lou Ricciardi. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Two years ago yesterday, Henry passed, and it's been pretty amazing to see his legacy continue to grow. Excuse me. Allegro. Henry J. Santos. High expectations of himself and of those around him. He was demanding that everyone be at the top of their game. As incredibly talented as he was humble. As excited about connecting young people to music through his Summer Piano Institute as he was about the virtuoso performances at some of the grand concert halls. And when he was a little too serious, you could rib him until he started to laugh. Henry and I first met 45 years ago at the time of his passing, 47 years ago now, when his much younger daughter, Nancy, and I were students at Sacred Heart High School in Kingston. I then had him as a class piano professor here, and our friendship expanded after I graduated in 1981. Henry became one of the very first group of my clients. A Bridgewater grad starting a business in wealth management was not usual at the time, and Henry came by and said, "I want to be one of your first customers." It didn't matter how much he wanted to be there. As friends for 45 years, Henry was in my life almost twice as long as my dad, who died when I was only 25. Devoted husband, proud father, faithful friend, teacher, compassionate soul, embodiment of BSU's motto, not to be ministered unto, but to minister. Excuse me. In August 2011, Henry invited me to join him and Lee for dinner at a restaurant in Middleborough to hear a former student, David Crone, who'd gone on to be a very successful professional pianist, perform. Henry had shared that David, while quite talented and successful as a musician, had been one of the few students in his entire teaching career who was almost impossible to mentor or teach. He remembered David clearly and quite frankly was a bit puzzled as to why David would even reach out to him at this point in life. Excuse me. But he was pleasantly surprised. A couple of pieces into David's concert, he stopped to acknowledge a very special guest in the audience, Henry, and then he continued with his performance. After a short break, David, who is blind, made his way around to the front of the grand piano and then proceeded to share his story of studying under Henry at Perkins. But that he, David, withdrew from Henry's mentoring because he wanted to do things his way. In fact, there was one particular classical piece that Henry insisted David practice and learn, as a requirement to passing his class. But David resisted and swore that he would never learn that piece of music for that one reason alone, and withdrew. David continued, sharing that indeed Henry's high expectations of himself had inspired his own high expectations, even if he was reluctant to acknowledge it in those early years. And then David said, "Professor Santos, I have a special piece I'd like to dedicate to you this evening." And he sat down and played the classical piece Henry wanted him to learn 40 years prior to that. It was a pretty special moment. Henry's eyes watered, his mouth open in awe the entire performance as David gave that performance of his life. Such was the lifelong influence Henry had on his students and will continue to have in the days and years ahead. Henry was a teacher to the end. His Summer Piano Institute was his pride and joy, an effort for which he was so passionate. This time of year, actually, he would already be meeting with the Haitian minister in Brockton to recruit students for this Summer Institute. He raised the money on his own, so there was no cost to the students. He was inspired to share the piano and his love of music because it was positive culture, and Henry wanted to mentor and share his incredible talents and teach young people wherever they were. He would even run to the bus drivers in the BAT routes when they stopped to get them to agree to make special trips during the summer so that he could get his kids to and from his Summer Piano Institute. He would literally wait in his car. Nancy's shaking her head for the buses to hit the bus stop, and then he'd run, hey, before you go. Anyways, other memories of Henry. How he would light up, telling me that Ellis Hall of Earth, Wind, and Fire, as he would share it, was yet another of Henry's students, still kept in touch with him, and would offer to send a limousine to pick up Henry to come see their concerts wherever they were in New England. A teacher to the end. When I first started taking lessons with Henry, he asked me a classical composer that I liked, and then we would also do a popular piece, and I said, Beethoven. Okay. He said, would you like to study where Beethoven learned? And so he proceeded to share the music of Clementi, who's become my favorite classical composer at this point. So it was a teacher at every single moment. So such a rich life he led. In 1996, under the leadership of then Afro-Am President Enos Harris, we worked together to establish the Henry Santos Scholarship and have it endowed, a fund that has helped students for over 25 years and is over $45,000 today. Henry had a great sense of humor. I played guitar for decades, and he would kid me about when he actually wanted to learn an instrument that had more than 6 strings, to give him a call. Excuse me. Fortunately, about age 75 of his, I realized I couldn't keep putting this off, and if I was going to do it, I needed to do it. I bought a piano. I called him up. I said, all right, let's go, Henry. And whether it was squeezing me in on a Monday night, a Thursday night, and then a Saturday morning, he was always trying to move me around the dial with my crazy schedule, but he did it. We would sit and practice. We would talk. His wife, Lee, frequently would say, I haven't heard the piano in about 20 minutes, boys. Or Mrs. Newton's waiting out here. Excuse me. One time, I had invited Henry to do a recital at my home, our home. A couple of times on behalf of the Bridgewater State Foundation, we were trying to do a little special performance for a little larger ask from some of our key donors. Henry and I would sit down and practice and have some fun. On the day that, in 2015, that the college humbled me with an honorary degree, had a reception back at my house, and Henry had offered to play a couple of songs that night. And towards the end of it, he had me sit down at the piano, and the music folks in the room will know about a 4-hand rondo. And we sat down, but it started to sound like a dirge, and neither of us could get out of the slow pace. He just started leaning down, cracking up, laughing at the page, and he's like, that is the most awful thing I've ever heard in my life. I said, you're not wrong. Henry would talk proudly and regularly of studying with Dr. Norden, who literally wrote the book on counterpoint. And there Henry, 50 years later, ever the perfectionist, would still sit at his piano practicing his counterpoint technique because he didn't believe he had it quite right yet. High expectations indeed, which probably made him real easy to grow up with, huh, Nancy? But then, when your dad talks fondly of Martin and all they experienced together, and you come to realize he was sharing stories of his roommate Martin, as in Martin Luther King Jr., you quickly appreciate the inspiring journey Henry has experienced and why he expected the best from everyone, whatever your role, whatever your talent. Henry's dear friend Martin Luther King Jr. had an endless stream of inspiring words, including one quote that Henry personified and lived. And I'd like to share it with you. MLK Jr. said, quote, "Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love." End quote. We miss you more, Henry, than any of those words can convey. Henry adored his wife, Lee, as you heard, his partner for life, with whom he is now reunited in his eternal afterlife. He was tremendously proud of his daughter, Nancy, and all the roles she fulfills in her life, especially thankful for for her embracing the challenge of being her daddy's caretaker the last few years of his life. He was impressed by Curtis's own high expectations and work ethic, and always had a proud story to share about his grandsons, Henry Lee, Marcus, and Terrence, whenever we met. Thank you, Nancy, for granting me this honor of a lifetime to speak fondly of your dad. The last time he played in public for the Afro-Am annual celebration in 2015, I picked him up at 225 Everett Street, and we drove to campus. As we entered the registration area on the third floor of Thank You, now back to being called the Student Union, you would have thought I walked in with Ray Charles. He was a rock star. Everyone wanted their picture taken with Henry. They even pushed back starting the event by 20 minutes because there was at least 45 minutes of people just jumping in to take a picture with Professor Santos. Pretty impressive. Finally, as we stop to celebrate your life today, my dear friend Henry, let me say that my Steinway never sounded as good as when you played it, nor will it ever sound as good again. Your coda, your final Allegro, is here. It continues since March 18th of 2020. It is now. What a masterpiece you composed. Part dolce, part legato, definitely part forte, and all Henry. Your fingers have since lifted from the piano keys. One final time, the echoes of the strings reverberating slowly to silence. But the music that was your life still plays on in our hearts and in our souls. We, whom you blessed with your compassion, your friendship, your humility, humor, and your immense talent, stand in awe and with gratitude in an ovation for the ages. Thank you.
Friends, colleagues, loved ones, I teach conducting here at Bridgewater State University, and in my beginning conducting class, we've got 40 number one rules of conducting. We've got a secret of great conducting, but we also have a mantra. And our mantra is honesty reigns. We're always going to be honest with each other. And in all honesty, I didn't know Henry all that well. Henry had retired long before I inked my contract here at Bridgewater State. And if memory serves, Henry had retired from even his role as a part-time instructor before I had arrived at Bridgewater State. But without knowing so, I felt the impact of my inheritance from Dr. Henry Santos. I felt Henry's legacy long before I met the man, long before I knew who Henry was. To be selfish, Henry was, for lack of a better word, instrumental in the development of a music major here at Bridgewater State University and the development of a music education degree at Bridgewater State. Without these degrees, I'm not here. My family is someplace else. On some level, I owe a part of my livelihood and my acceptance at Bridgewater State to the legacy of Henry Santos. At Bridgewater State, I've found a climate of appreciation for the arts, of appreciation for music, and an appreciation for the work of students and faculty. This is a part of Henry's legacy. At Bridgewater State, I've found a climate of appreciation for diversity. Diversity in terms of ethnic, racial, social, economic diversity. This is a part of Henry's legacy. Now, in preparing this speech, I did a Google search for what is it that I'm supposed to talk about at these kind of events. And apparently I'm supposed to tell a story. So here's my story. Long ago, when I was interviewing for this position, and I was interviewing for positions in Texas and Florida and Atlanta and Minnesota and Wisconsin and all over the country, part of my interview at Bridgewater State was a one-on-one meeting with then Provost Dr. Howard London, where he could explain what Bridgewater State meant to him and try to get a feeling for, am I a good fit? Would I be a bear? And one of the things that he had mentioned is Bridgewater State takes the concept of social justice seriously. And here we mean it. And I was taken aback. I wasn't exactly sure what he meant. In hindsight, having been through all of these interviews and different concepts, I realized that at Bridgewater State University, social justice is not a platitude. It's not an abstract part of a mission statement. It's not part of a pillar of excellence. At Bridgewater State, we mean this. We walk the walk. At Bridgewater State, social justice is who we are. This is a part of Henry's legacy. We have direct examples of this legacy, of this inheritance in his scholarship, a scholarship designed for students majoring in special education or elementary education, but students coming from Black, Cape Verdean, Hispanic, African, or Native American descent. For a number of years, Bridgewater State University, under Henry's direction, leadership, hosted the Summer Piano Institute, which served students aged 7 to 67, primarily from gateway communities. And while certainly Henry isn't responsible for all of the numerous programs dedicated to diversity and social justice on Bridgewater State, see our Richard Martin Institute, or our newly formed Bridgewater State University Social Justice Choir, Henry's fingerprints can be found throughout our mission and our values. This is a part of Henry's legacy. Now, my contact with Henry was limited as well. Really, the only time that I knew I could spend time with Henry was at then President Dana Molefaria's chairman's dinner. This was a dinner for important people. Henry would be invited because he was important. I was invited because I could put together 6 students in a jazz combo and kind of play some jazz trombone to provide some prelude music for the event before dinner. It was a great event. But it was there that I got to meet Henry and realized I was dealing with someone who was kind, sharp, had well-articulated thoughts about music and life. Henry was interested in the state of the Department of Music and the well-being of his former colleagues and the well-being of our former and current Bridgewater State University students. This became a highlight of this annual event for me, and really our only bone of contention that we held was my continually asking, cajoling, needling, I'd really like you to dust off your conducting chops and maybe consider writing a piece for a whole lot of winds, brass, and percussion. Even if you're willing to write a piano piece, I'll be perfectly happy to do the lifting of arranging and orchestrating it and having your colors come alive. On some level, it feels like a missed opportunity that I could have pushed a little bit harder. It never came to fruition. My knowledge of Henry as a musician is quite limited as well. And sure, I had read his bio and a list of his professional and artistic accomplishments, but it wasn't until a recital in November of 2013, on a cold, chilly, foggy Saturday afternoon, not much different than today, where Henry promoted a concert of New Orleans composers of color. And it was there that I got to really experience Henry's superb artistry, his ability to play the piano with color, texture, with touch, with a flexibility of time feel. And 10 years later, I can come to a greater appreciation of just how far ahead of his time Henry was. Today, directors of choirs, orchestras, bands, chamber ensembles, and solo recitals seem to be tripping over themselves to be finding and rediscovering the music of lost composers, of composers that were underserved, and whose composers never really got to see the light of day the way that they deserved to be. 10 years ago, I got to hear a concert specifically for that concept. And Henry had been doing it for years before that. This notion of championing composers and musicians held back for any number of reasons. This is a part of Henry's legacy. Now I look around, again, I see friends, colleagues, and loved ones, and I realize I teach in an institution that I dearly love. I'm surrounded by colleagues and friends that are dedicated in their teaching and their caring of students and student well-being. I have the privilege of teaching students from an awesome mix of backgrounds. And I think we are a piece of Henry's legacy. At this time, I have the absolute pleasure and honor of welcoming a friend and a colleague of extraordinary stature to the stage for your musical portion of today's event. Please let me welcome Dr. Deborah Nemko.
Part of the job of the pianist is making sure the piano is set up, and that's what I'm going to do right now. So, good for the arms. say that I've chosen three pieces for you today, and the first one is by Henry Santos. The first piece is from a sketch that Nancy discovered not so long ago. We were looking for this music. I said when I heard about this opportunity, I really wanted to find music by Henry. I wanted to bring that to life. And Nancy understood that this was going to be kind of a daunting task because Henry was a humble guy and he didn't want his music published. And so I went through boxes and I found all kinds of interesting memorabilia, but not really Henry's music until Nancy sent me some. So the first piece is a sonatine. It's a sketch that he wrote. I have his manuscript. It's magical to play from a manuscript when you know the person and you feel like you're a conduit. So enjoy. You're the first to hear this. Lights on, I can see the music better. Thank you so much. So the next piece I'm going to play for you is a work by Frédéric Chopin. As we've heard, Henry loved the classics and embraced all of the composers that he felt were passionate and spoke to him. And this is a piece that speaks to me. It's an octave by Chopin, Opus 48, number 1, in C minor. the last piece I'll play for you today is a piece that was a special request. It's a wonderful piece. I didn't know it before Nancy asked me to play it. It's called The Dying Poet. It's by Louis Moreau Gottschalk, one of those composers that Henry was championing all those years ago. Louis Moreau Gottschalk was born in New Orleans, and he was of mixed background, all kinds of mixes, Haitian, Creole, Jewish, German, and all of this sort of melded together to produce a very interesting musical voice. He ended up spending much of his life as a virtuoso pianist, because he was actually a prodigy at a very young age, as a virtuoso pianist in South America, in Brazil, and performed in Cuba. And unfortunately died at a very young age of 40. He loved to travel, and he ended up catching yellow fever, we think. But he left quite a wonderful body of music behind. And I'm told this is one of Henry's favorite pieces.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That was just beautiful. Sorry, live music still makes me cry after a long time without it and such beautiful memories. Thank you to the Santos family for letting us have this moment to be together and to celebrate the memory of your father and grandfather and uncle and father-in-law. It's a real privilege. So let us leave while there's music in our ears and in our souls and memory and gratitude and thankfulness in our hearts. Thank you for being here.